guest, who is Willie McBride. He's a Santa Barbara Yacht Club member, but he's also a past Olympic coach. Interestingly, though, his roots come from the Santa Barbara Youth Sailing Foundation, where he was not only the director for the Youth Foundation, but he's also a sailor in it for most of his youth, where he went on to the Youth Worlds and 29ers and won 420 midwinters as junior sailor. And then after that, went on to do a lot more professional coaching and some really high-level sailing, where he won Melges 20 Nationals multiple times, Melges 20 North Americans and Europeans. But what's really cool about Willie is he's grown skiff racing since he was a teen in California and across the country with his unique brand of coaching. Speaking from personal experience and having worked with him as a guest coach for the UCSB team, he has a unique way of framing a thought that helps a sailor to see something they've known for years in a completely unique light, giving new passion to old ideas and lighting a fire inside many young sailors that has helped them keep their learning curve steep and growth nonstop. Truly, truly amazing. I feel like coaching gold comes out of this guy's mouth sometimes. Welcome, Willie McBride. All right. So this is an open forum. I am the moderator. If you have a question for Willie McBride tonight, be it starting or not, reach out. He's here to answer anything. And if you guys get quiet, I've got my own brand of questions I'll ask. So if anybody has a question, feel free to put it in the chat or just shout it out. We've got a small enough group that we can just have you shout it out.
Yeah, awesome. Sounds good. I think, the only thing I would add to that is that, I sent out some videos on starting and definitely kind of wanted to, provide some food for thought and some material to talk about. But, I'm open to talk about anything and I'm kind of just here as a resource for you guys. So if anybody has any questions, let me know. And if not, maybe Brad has some.
You guys, I can start this off real quick. One of my questions for you, you sent out, a couple of videos there, but when it comes to starting, do you have like a specific pre-start process that you go to each time, or do you mix it up a lot as a sailor? And do you have any recommendations specifically for other racers? Do you feel like it's better to have a repeatable start routine? And how do you relate that to, changing conditions, pin favor, boat favor, et cetera?
Yeah, totally. So, I guess where I'd start with that is that I think, first of all, having your routine on the line is obviously super, super important. And a couple of things, I think I'm pulling up the material that I sent here. But, a couple of things that I touched on here were kind of how to measure the favored end using your compass and knowing, how favored is that favored end actually, and then how to judge the line. And to me, kind of the whole process of my pre-start routine is all about trying to guess at what that start is going to look like. And so trying to kind of think in advance about how big is the fleet, how many boats do we have, how big is the line, and how favored is the line. And so what is the attitude of the fleet going to be? And to me, it's kind of comes down to, if you've got a really crowded fleet or a really crowded starting line and a favored end, then it's really a risk versus reward calculation, right? And so I think that a couple of different things that I talked about in one of those videos on how to judge the line, in my mind, there's kind of 3 different ways to judge the line. You can get a line sight, and I think that that's something that a lot of people have tried, or a lot of people do, but in a really good fleet, especially on a dense starting line, it's going to be really hard to use that line sight to see where the line is, because there's a lot of boats between you and that line sight. And so in those situations, just judging a line based on the boats around you might end up being a better technique. And so to go back to how that fits into the routine, to me, super critical to measure how favored the end of the line is. And I do that by running the line, taking that compass heading, and then shooting head to wind into the breeze and taking the wind direction, and then subtracting 90 degrees from, or subtracting or adding 90 degrees to that heading of the line to figure out what is the line square to. And I think that that tells you a lot about what the start might look like. To me, you know, if you know which end is favored and you know how favored it is, starting in a big fleet that I'm usually coaching, your starting line is going to be set based on the number of boats that are on the line, which is obviously different than the yacht club starting line, where it's the same length no matter how many boats are on the line. And so, you know, in a big fleet race where you've got a line that's being set for that fleet, that video on how to measure the favored end is really going to kind of hit on some of the points of, you know, how to play the line differently depending on how favored each end is. But really the thing that I would be thinking about on the yacht club line on a wet Wednesday or something like that is just that the line is so open. You know, there's so few boats on the line for how long it is, that I think that on that wet Wednesday line, it's super, super important to start at the favored end. And you probably can judge the line based on where the mark actually is in the water, because you're starting so close to that end anyways. So to me, pre-start routine, I really think it's super important to shoot the wind and take your wind reading, and to do that a lot of times to kind of see what phase are you in and is it changing. And then also to run the line and get the heading for the starting line. And then I think, you know, on the yacht club starting line, I'd definitely be getting a line sight. But then to me, I like to have some check-in points as well. So when you're in sequence, I think that, you know, the start can get a little bit crazy on the line. And so I like to have a couple of checkpoints. I like to have a checkpoint at 1:30 where I'm probably jumping on the line, and I know that I'm going to be set up by 1:30. I like to have a checkpoint at 30 seconds where, you know, that's the time that you're going for your final controls. You're getting your sails set up. And then I like to have a checkpoint, depending on the boat you're sailing, to make sure that you have nice flow on and you're kind of like on your final approach around 10 or 12 seconds or something like that, where you're actually starting to creep and making sure that that's going to make your acceleration move good.
Cool, thanks.
Hey Willie, quick question, Clark Sterling. Appreciated your videos today. Plan A, B, and C were great. Specifically to Santa Barbara, obviously we do have a wide line, usually are not so crowded. And I am just joining the J70 fleet. Is there a rule of thumb? I know you were talking about how long one should hold that first tack, but on the first windward leg on our course going up to D or to K, is there a period of time that you like to hold that first tack?
Yeah, you know, I think that's a really interesting question, because obviously so often we're out there and the right-hand side of the course is favored, whether because you're getting out of the current or because there's puffs coming down off of the point up there at Ledbetter. And to me, I always feel like the biggest advantage is to be the last boat out of the right, as opposed to being the first boat into the right. I've seen a lot of races on the wet Wednesday course where if you're the first boat into that side, there's boats up on your hip who are on port tack with you coming over, and you have to tack. And if they can sneak across your bow, or even if they duck, if they can be later into that side than you, now all of a sudden you're having to tack back and deal with those boats who've gotten further to the right than you have. So to me, kind of the way I usually think about that is that it's more of I like to talk about the race course in terms of you have two kind of tactical schools of thought maybe. And one of those is predicting wind, trying to figure out what do I think the wind is going to do next and how do I position myself according to that. But I think the other one that's really important is just fleet managing. And to me, the question you're asking is how much do you try to predict wind versus how much do you manage the fleet? If you were just predicting wind, if you were the only boat out there, then you might want to be that first boat into the right. But because you have other boats over there who are going to make it hard for you to kind of get into the right and then get out and then get back into it, to me, the answer is kind of that I would like to wait as long as I possibly can to get over to that right-hand side, but still be one of the first boats over there. So that means that, if you wanted the right-hand side and you started at the boat end, if you're the boatmost boat, you might be able to hang for a long time. And especially if the other boats that you think you're racing against, the other boats that are kind of in that front row with you are to leeward of you and you're able to kind of pin them into the left, you might wait a pretty long time before you get over there to that right-hand side. Whereas, if you start down the line a little ways, then probably you're just waiting for your lane. You're waiting for your opportunity to get over there. And more likely, if that's the case, you're not really making that decision so much as you are just waiting for your opportunity, because somebody on your hip is going to eventually tack, and that's going to mean, okay, now it's my turn and I get to go without being in bad air. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I appreciate that. And obviously it makes sense with our current and with the wind, as you said, coming off of Ledbetter, to be able to hold that initial tack, but then again, get to the right as soon as possible. But it's interesting, your comment about ducking you, because if you're on a starboard tack, you still have the right of way. But when they duck you, if I understand you correctly, you should be getting right as soon thereafter as you can.
Yeah. And Brad, is there any way for me to pull up the whiteboard here?
I'm going to make you the host of this thing real quick. Okay. I think that's the only way I know how to do it. So boom, you're the host.
All right. Let's see about this. So if I pull up this whiteboard, I think I can I'll do my best to draw kind of the coastline, and then the point juts out like that or something. And then we've got the starting line down in here and the kelp forest kind of up right there. And then maybe the swim buoys here, right? If we're lucky, where we get just that little lane to sneak through. And I think that, so to kind of draw what I'm talking about, if you're starting at the boat here, if you tack right away and then you get to the beach right away, these boats down here who waited a little bit longer are going to be an issue for you when you tack. And maybe you call starboard and they duck you. But if that's the case, then they just were able to get further right. And now when you come back again to try to get up to this little lane on the inside here, you're going to have to worry about them calling starboard, and either you duck or, depending on how many tacks you think you're going to do. Like I say, I think the most important thing is being that final boat to be able to get to the right, and the first one to be able to get into this lane. Because if you're the first one into that lane, I think it's likely that you get this final little advantage over here on the right. So anybody who is further to the left of you here is either going to tack to leeward of you, or is going to have to go beyond and either tack in bad air or tack on your hip. And so you'll be ahead, going through that little lane, which is super powerful. So, yeah, I think I'm forgetting what your question was just now, but I think
that answers it.
Okay, yeah.
That really answers it. That's great. I appreciate the diagram.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. I've got another question on the chat box from Catherine. How often do you have an early start? And I think she probably means how many times are you over early? Would you say it like percentage wise?
Yeah, sure. That's a really interesting question. You know, I used to sail with a guy who, in most of our regattas, you get about one throw out for every 6 races. How does Wet Wednesday work? Are there any?
You get like one throw out for each series, like spring, summer, fall, and then you get 6 for the entire year season.
Okay. So his philosophy was basically that if you aren't over early the number of times that you got throwouts, then you weren't pushing the line hard enough. And I think it's an interesting philosophy. I guess that to me, when I think about what a good start means and what a good start looks like, I would rather beat the boats around me off the line than be pushing the line. So some people will try to start against the line. And what I mean by that is if this is the starting line, they'll always try to be as close to that line as possible. And their definition of a good start is, you know, how many meters off the line were you at that gun? But to me, I think that where high percentage consistency comes in starting is being in a controlling position on the boats around you. And if that means that everybody is off the line, so if everybody is, where'd my pen go? If everybody is off the line down here, but you're just in a slightly more controlling position, then you're still ahead at the gun, and there's no risk that you're going to be over. And so again, you know, on the yacht club starting line, I think that this is a little bit less relevant because we have fewer boats than kind of the length of the line is set for. And so you can be more accurate with starting on the line by having a line sight. But the more crowded it gets, and this might even apply on the yacht club starting line, if the whole fleet is starting up here at the boat end and everybody is kind of crammed into that boat third, the more important it is to just beat the boats around you. And I guess sometimes if everybody's pushing the line hard, kind of the flip side of that same coin is that might mean that you're over in order to beat the boats around you. But I guess, you know, the goal is to beat those boats by inches, not by feet. And if you can do that, generally speaking, the fleet is not going to be pushing so hard that you're over. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly. In terms of how often should you be over? You know, not often because it hurts a lot, obviously. But, you know, I do think that it's definitely, if you're not ever over, then maybe you could be pushing the line a little bit harder. And the other part of that is I would think about it really in terms of you have these 3 ways of judging the line. You can judge the line based on the boats around you. You can judge the line by having a line sight, or you can judge the line by starting really close to an end where you actually have this physical mark in the water to tell you where the line is. And if you find that you are over a lot, then, you know, really kind of committing to one of those things and really practicing getting line sights and using line sights, or, you know, practicing judging a line based on being right next to it, I think are really worthwhile things to focus on.
We got a question from Jeff Slaff. Back to the Wet Wednesday strategy, what would one do to stay in the race if you aren't leading the pack in the lane between the key and the swim buoys? So I think maybe the kelp, I think he meant the kelp and the swim buoys. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a great question. And I think that, you know, especially when you think about the series as a whole, that's a really important strategic decision to make, right? I think that you know, so often we think about these Wednesday night races as kind of these one-off events because it's only one race in a night and either you win or you lose. But from a series standpoint, you know, conserving your place kind of mid-fleet can be just as important or more important. You know, every point is worth the difference between fourth and third is the same as the difference between second and first, right? Even though it feels a lot better to get a first instead of a second. So here's a couple of things that you might think about. Let me draw this a little bit better. So we've got I'm going to draw this as K mark here, maybe something like that. And then Ledbetter Point kind of comes up like this. And the coastline is like that. And the kelp bed is here. And so to me, you know, one of the things that I think a lot of the teams that I've sailed with on Wet Wednesday who tend to do quite well really try to do before every race is if you can get out there early and you can test this little lane out and see what does that look like. I think that's one of the most valuable pieces of information you can possibly get. And Brad, to go back to your comment or your question about pre-start routine, you know, that's obviously well before the start sequence. If you have to get all the way up to the kelp patty and then make it back down to the line. But I would say that that's probably the most valuable thing you could know here in Santa Barbara, because sometimes the tide is high. Sometimes the tide is so high that the kelp is standing on end and you can actually sail through it without really getting it on your blades, right? But depending on how big that lane is, I think that's really going to dictate your strategy through this slot here. And so in general, let me generalize here for a minute and talk about just a normal race course, not the Wet Wednesday course, but just a normal race course, because this is a really important idea. In general, when we're thinking about a race course, one of the things that's really important to master is ley line management. So if we think we've got these two ley lines kind of coming down from the mark, if what you see in a lot of junior sailing events is that the first place boat tacks here on ley line. I'm sorry, I suck at drawing with this whiteboard. And then the second place boat is going to sail just beyond them and tack on their hip right here. And the next boat is going to tack on their hip. And by the time you get to the fourth or fifth boat, all of a sudden you are super far away from that mark. And you know, you've just given away a lot of boat lengths here. And this is especially important, I think, when you have current on the course. Because when you have current, it's really hard to judge the ley line from far away. And that generally is what we end up doing here in Santa Barbara is we're tacking somewhere in the corner here, either to go to K, which is super far away, or to make it through the slot, which again, like by the time you get to the place where you can tack again and you've passed these swim buoys over here, is still super far away. So I think that the most important thing you can do here is if you have the opportunity to lead back instead of playing through and getting up on someone's hip, that's going to depend on where that kelp is, right? So we'll go back to this Santa Barbara race course. If we draw K in here and the kelp patch in here, the question that you should always be asking and kind of the conversation that you should be having is, do we lead back or do we play through? And in a situation where you can, in general, you'd like to lead back. So if that boat that's winning is coming out of this right-hand side, if you have the opportunity to go shy of their line and end up underneath them, you know, maybe they still look strong here. That's going to mean that you didn't sail any extra distance. And that's especially true here in Santa Barbara on days where the breeze is a little bit further right. So if the breeze is kind of coming from this wind direction, and if you tuck up underneath this first swim buoy, so if you ended up having to sail, let me draw in, this is the leader now, right here. If you had to sail beyond them and tack on their hip and tuck up right underneath these swim buoys, you might end up actually reaching around here and then heading up as you get to this final swim buoy. Whereas a boat that can tack shy here might be able to sail their close hauled course the whole way through and stay clean. But again, I think the most important thing, the biggest question mark, is whether or not you're going to end up in that kelp. And so if you are going to end up in that kelp, there's two scenarios that I would then say you're looking at. One is that you do have this lane on their hip here underneath the swim buoys where you can kind of stay in clear air. The other is tacking straight behind them. And in general, I think that this is a really important place on the race course because it's a place where there can be bad things happening to you that you don't have a whole lot of control over. You know, there's not a lot of lanes through that gap. And if in order to get through there, you have to tack behind somebody, that might just be what you have to do. And if that is the case, the most important thing right there is to stay calm and kind of acknowledge it objectively and be like, okay, we're going to lose some boat lengths here, you know, and that's okay. We're playing the game right now. And I think that the biggest thing that I see sometimes happen is boats will tack in that bad air and the crew will be like, you know, oh, we're losing boats. And the skipper will be like, oh, we're losing boats. And things will spiral downward because all of a sudden now we're spun up because we're bleeding boat lengths. When the reality is, you know, there really wasn't any alternative. So I think bottom line that corner is a high risk situation here in Santa Barbara, and you've got to kind of take what you can get. And the key is knowing exactly how big that lane is and whether or not you can lead back.
Cool. Do we have any other questions people want to shout out? Otherwise, I can throw something at Willie here too.
Yeah, Brad, I've got one more question if I could. Willie, going back to your plan A, B, and C, and it really was a terrific video that you did, but obviously part of the video had some furious tacking right on the line, and it was a very crowded line, unlike our start. But do you have any hints for how to kind of avoid some of that last-minute tacking that was displayed in some of your videos?
Yeah, sure. Totally. So, you know, I think that there's a couple things that come to mind when we talk about kind of those let's say the last 30 seconds leading up to the gun and maybe the minute and 30 after the gun. And one of the things you're referring to here is that, you know, what I am basically preaching is that your goal is to be going full speed, 100%, for 3 out of the first 5 minutes. And so there's a couple things on the line, depending on the boat that you're sailing. In the J70, I would say that the J70 starting is a lot like skiff starting in overpowered conditions. And essentially what that looks like to me is you've got your starting line, you've got the whole fleet kind of stacks up here, a ways off the line, maybe let's say 6 boat lengths off the line. And in those last 30 seconds, you kind of get this slow creep where the fleet is competing to go as slow as possible so that at the gun, or before the gun actually, they can put their bows down, have this distance left to the line, and hit it at full speed. And so I think that there's a couple things that are really important here. The battle, to me, we can simplify this battle with, you know, let's say let's just throw out a hypothetical situation, 60 boats on the line. Even if there's 60 boats on the line, I think that we can simplify it into this scenario of 3 boats, right? So we've got us in the middle and then a competitor on either side. And really at the end of the day, those are the boats we care about. We care about beating those 2 boats, the boats on either side of us. And we could simplify that even further for a second by saying all we care about is us and the boat next to us. So in a 2-boat battle, to me, there's one key component to winning this 2-boat battle. If you're the leeward boat, your goal, your whole approach here is to try to stay in sync with what the windward boat does. And so if you're doing this slow creep to the line, and let's say that slow creep is, I'm going to throw out a number. So in the Meldrecht 20 that I used to do a lot of sailing on, we said that our slowest speed to the line was 1.3 knots. If we got underneath 1.3 knots, then we knew we were going to start sliding sideways, and you don't want to be sliding sideways in that last 30 seconds, right? So slowest speed is 1.3, fastest speed, let's say, is 3 knots or something like that. So the track to this line is basically going to be 3 knots forwards and then shooting more or less head to wind or high, and slowing the boat to that 1.3 and then back down to get some flow on so that you're now back up to 3 knots, and then scalloping up again here to 1.3, and then at the end doing your acceleration move. So it's kind of that scalloping track up to the starting line. And so if you're that leeward boat, when I say get in sync with the windward boat, essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to match that scallop of the windward boat. When they go up, you go up. When they go down to build flow, you go down. And if you can stay just in sync like that, there's definitely going to be mistakes made by everybody on the line, right? At some point, this boat's going to hit a piece of chop that they didn't expect. And you are, as a leeward boat, going to hit a piece of chop that you didn't expect. And you're going to have to put the bow down. But the thing is, as the leeward boat, when you put the bow down, in this situation of just 2 boats, there's nobody to leeward, so it's no big deal. But when they hit that piece of chop and have to put the bow down, now you've just tightened the gap and tightened that kind of gap to windward with that boat. So if you can stay in sync with the windward boat, it's going to give you a lot of control right at the end of that start. And the opposite is true if you're the windward boat. If you're the windward boat, your goal is to stay out of sync with the leeward boat. So when they put their bow up and get slow, that's when you want to be speed on, going fast, because you know that the next thing they're going to have to do is go bow down. And that's when you can go bow up and open this gap up again. And if you time this well, then your last move is up when they're down. And then you're going for your acceleration, as they're either going for one more high kill speed, or they're just accelerating down here, and you've kept your hole nice and open. So I would say that the number one thing I can say in that last 30 seconds that you can do to minimize tacking is really try to stay in sync as the leeward boat or out of sync as the windward boat. And the other thing is, as soon as you recognize that things aren't going well, as soon as, if you're that windward boat and you hit that piece of chop and the leeward boat has been in sync with you and now your hole just got really small, the sooner you can recognize that that's the case, the sooner you can be bailing out and backing out and trying to start on port. And in my experience, that's a super underutilized strategy, is that port tack start. Everybody is always trying to start on starboard, and tacking after the gun can be a really costly situation. But if you can just plan to start on port, then a lot of times you can escape in a really good lane. And so that would be the other thing I would say is, if you find yourself in a in a compromised spot at 30 seconds where you're like, I'm not sure if I can hang on here, chances are things are not going to get better, right? That to me, that means that this lured boat has you in their trap, and for you to resist and say, I think I can survive. I think I can make it out of here. I think I'm just going to have a great boat handling maneuver at the end. They're just sitting there waiting for you to, put the bow down and try to accelerate. And when you do, that's kind of them springing the trap. That's the moment that it actually really starts to look bad. And so, if it looks bad at 30, it's not going to get better. Just get out of there when you can.
Wow,
Awesome. Go ahead.
that's fascinating. Just a final follow-up. Some of what you're talking about is a little bit beyond what I see very often, but your diagrams are terrific, Willie. My follow-up question was, you're the lure boat and you're trying to mimic the windward boat. Is there a point at which you want to, and I know it may not be Corinthian for our fleet, but is there a point at which you want to put them into luff right before the start?
Yeah, so I would say, your biggest weapon as that lured boat is that you have control of the windward boat. And because you have control of them, you kind of know what they're going to do, right? And so to me, I think that sometimes this lured boat is tempted to try to like tap out the windward boat and just bump them and say protest or something like that. But as soon as that happens, all bets are off. They're like, okay, I got to get out of here and I have to spin now. And who knows what they're going to do? Maybe they trim the sails in and try to go fast and try to escape forwards this way if they have enough time. Maybe they backwind their sails and end up sliding sideways into you and rafting up, and bad things happen from there. But I think the bottom line is your weapon here is control, right? And so yes, absolutely take them up head to wind. And one thing that I really like to do, and this goes back to that idea of, it's in my mind, it's more important to beat the boats around you than to be on the line. The way you beat the boats around you, if you're that lured boat and you have good control of that windward boat, is, you wait kind of head to wind or above a close hauled course, and this boat above you starts yelling, like, put the bow down, let's go, let's go, let's go. And as long as you have a nice hole to leeward here, you just wait and you wait and you wait, and eventually they really start to squirm and they put the bow down because they're like, we're going to be late. We got to go here. We have to do something. And the moment they put the bow down, that's the moment that it's all over, that you have complete control. And that's when you put the bow down and go. And so if you can wait a half second longer, if they're, it's like if you can let them be the one that leads the dance, it's almost imperceptible how quickly you can go, and all of a sudden, you're totally in control, and you have that boat on your hip that you're going to beat in the first 30 seconds of the race. So yeah, absolutely. I think if you can keep your bow up until they put their bow down just a tiny bit and get rid of the last little bit of hope that they had right there, then you're in a really strong position. And if you can beat the boats around you off the line, now not only do you have your lane, but your lane starts to get bigger, right? Because boats around you start to drop back, and now you have their lane too. So that's a huge tool that you have when you are able to get good control like that on the starting line.
Super, thanks.
Awesome. So if it's 6:15, so if maybe we'll do one more question or any final thoughts from Willie, but if anyone else got one more question we can throw out at him?
Hey, Willie, I got one for you.
Yeah.
So, thinking about in your career, and you get into the medal race, do you approach the start any differently, or, on a thinking about the yacht club level. We're race 8 of the Wet Wednesday series. God, we're tight. I'm right with Fargo. I got to beat this guy.
Yeah.
Do I approach the start any differently, or is there anything that you talk to your teams about?
Yeah, to me, I guess I think that's the most fun, right? Because, and to go back to something I was talking about a little bit earlier, like that's when I would think you're really, you're trying to game it out in your head. Like, what is their mindset? What are they thinking, and what are they going to do? And how do I, I think that one of the biggest things is like, how do I put that little nugget of doubt in their mind? And at the same time, not create the same one in my mind. And so I guess, one of the questions that I think is really interesting is, so when you think about race course philosophy of the starting line, right? And all the races that you're going to sail in your lifetime, where are you going to start, and how often are you going to start there? And if you could only start in one spot every single time, where would it be? I think that for most people, if you kind of go down the rabbit hole of thinking about that, to me, the place that makes the most sense is kind of to leeward of the boat third, because you're going to have races in your life where the pin's favored, races in your life where the boat's favored, times when the right side of the course is favored or the left side of the course is favored. But the thing that gives an advantage to kind of that leeward part of the boat third is that your plan B and your plan C escape from that spot is really high percentage. It's way easier to bail out. And so for me, I guess to take that a step further, on the yacht club line or on the medal race course where you only have 10 boats, I think the super high percentage move there is to start on port, because you're immediately going fast, you're immediately escaping from the line, and you're coming back with starboard advantage. And so I guess, to me, in that high stakes environment, I guess you have to ask the question, maybe to a certain extent, how confident am I that I'm just going to be controlling this thing from the get-go? But I think that, to kind of eliminate that risk and put yourself in a spot where you can just focus on doing the simple things. I think when the pressure's on, that's such a huge thing, right? Is just simplifying to the place where all you have to worry about is sailing the boat fast and hitting that first tack well. And I think especially here in Santa Barbara, being able to come off the line with speed and go towards that right-hand side, I would think, that port tack start might be a really high percentage move. And so I think that to a certain extent, it's a question of confidence, right? It's like, how can I make myself confident and make them lose confidence? And I also really love the port tack start for that reason, because to me, if you're a good boat in the fleet and people are like, okay, Jeff is starting on port, what does he know that I don't know? They're starting the race already thinking like, oh, this is weird. Like, I'm not totally sure what's going on. And so, I think it's kind of that game theory of the mental game of how do you get the other boat to kind of blink first in some ways.
Nice. Any follow-up questions on it? I didn't even get to ask what your favorite drink was. I had a whole queue of random personal questions.
I'm really crushing the LaCroix here in quarantine.
Cool. Well, I think we'll wrap it there. I do want to thank you, Willie. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I really appreciate it. I had a couple of announcements that I wanted to let people know about. One was, let's see here, the Monday Forum coming up actually is on Aston Smith. And I don't know if you know him, but he's kind of an amazing opti sailor. So they've been doing live Zooms on the Monday Forums, and I think that'll actually be a really fun one to watch because he's a charismatic kid and he's a killer sailor. And also, we've got, for those who don't know on this call, we're doing our Yacht Club virtual regattas on Mondays, which have been really fun. So there's still some spots in the gold fleet, and if we get enough, we'll open up a silver fleet. But if you want to get involved in that, certainly let us know. And the final one is that tomorrow night, Sharon Green, it overlaps with the virtual Wet Wednesdays, but she has been asked by the American Sailing Association to kind of do a presentation with Peter Eisler about her kind of photography career and sailing and all that. So that's going to be going on tomorrow for anybody who's interested. But if you're sailing virtual regattas on Wet Wednesdays, then it's going to be recorded, so you can watch it later if you want. But Willie, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. Even now, I still am like, nice. You know what I mean? It's like nice to learn from you. If you guys have any questions, I'm sure if you didn't get your question answered, I bet $100 Willie'd be happy to answer it offline or online, kind of on a separate time. Thanks again, Willie. Any last comments, buddy?
Willie.
Hey, thanks, Brad. Thanks, Willie. Great show.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Appreciate it. All right,
That was
everybody.
great. Thank you.
We'll catch you at Virtual Wet Wednesday tomorrow. Cheers.
All right.
Thanks.
See ya.